Hello and welcome to the preview on the Fulhamish YouTube channel. My name's Elizabeth Barnard and I'll be your host. Today it's back down to earth with a thud after getting knocked out of the FA Cup this weekend. But league action waits for no man, and where better to start than the Emirates on Tuesday night? And to look forward to this game, I am delighted to be joined by Chronicles of a Gooner, Harry Symeou. Harry, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining me. Um, Firstly, I'd love to take a zoomed out look at Arsenal's season so far. Second place seemed pretty established there yet again, but it's been 3 years of second place in a row. And with Man City slipping up so majorly this season, does it feel, are you happy to be in second and that feels good? Or does this feel a bit like a missed opportunity?
It's been a really frustrating season, I think, from an Arsenal point of view for so many reasons. You mentioned that Arsenal finished second. This will be three times in a row, and if you go back sort of 5 years, then that would have been deemed as real progress, and it has been progress. But I think when you're in the midst of it, when you're kind of desperate to get over the line, you can get into a situation where you look at second as failure, and it's very kind of difficult to manage those emotions because you want to say that no, this should have been Arsenal's season, particularly as you mentioned with Manchester City dropping off. But sometimes things don't work out that way. There are so many variables in football, and that's what makes it for me the best sport in the world. I think injuries have really cost Arsenal
Mm.
this season. I think people say I'm just an Arsenal fan that's got nothing better to do than moan, but I think there's been some really bad refereeing calls along the way that have impacted on Arsenal's ability as well to take maximum points in some of those games. So yeah, frustration is probably the overarching feeling at the moment. But you can't deny the progress they've made under Mikel Arteta, and this is probably the first time in about 4 seasons now where you're looking at it and you're going, maybe we've just gone backwards a little bit. So I don't want to overreact, but I can't sit here and say that I'm happy with it, of course.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. Like, it's kind of the same within the Fulham fan base a bit. Like, we're established in the Premier League, and that's amazing. And 3 years ago, we would have dreamt of finishing 10th in the Premier League. But now all of the fan base are itching for something more. Like, we're itching to get into those European spots. So I definitely feel you on that. And as you mentioned, it really has been a season defined by injuries for Arsenal, especially in attacking areas, right? So Saka's been out for quite a while. Martinelli, Havertz, Jesus. What sort of health is your squad coming into this fixture in? Is Saka back? Have I heard that?
Well, I'm not sure, if I'm being completely honest with you, what exactly the deal is with Bukayo Saka because the under 21s are playing tonight. Now, there is a suspicion that he might take part in the under 21s game at Norwich. Now, if he plays in that and has any
Mhm.
part in that, then the chances of him playing against Fulham tomorrow are very low. So I think you're going to learn basically tonight whether or not he's going to be in the squad for Fulham. But it's interesting because I do believe that Bukayo Saka's a little bit further along the line in terms of his recovery than maybe we were initially led to believe. Now, that probably would have been deliberate in order to just manage the pressure around him. And obviously the idea and the aim is to get him back for Real Madrid. There's still a couple of
Mm.
Premier League games between sort of the time of recording and when we meet Real Madrid. So there is a lot of hope that he will be able to play some part in that tie. But whether he makes it against Fulham on Tuesday night, I'm not entirely sure at the minute. In terms of everybody else, though, it feels like we're starting to get everybody back to fitness. And so if you do get Bukayo Saka back for Real Madrid, then Arsenal are only one player off what you would say is their best 11. So yes, okay, it feels like it's getting better now, and there's a lot of happiness around that, but it does feel to a degree, particularly with the Premier League, too little, too late.
Yeah, no, I feel that. I remember obviously when the City game at the beginning of February when Arsenal won 5-1, and I thought, wow, they're gonna challenge Liverpool. And then since then, it's just been quite inconsistent. Obviously, great result in the Champions League against PSV, but aside from that, haven't really been able to make the waves. Do you think that's down to injuries, or do you think there's something else at play that means Arsenal have been a bit weaker in the last couple of months?
I think it's mainly down to injuries, but there are other things that I probably would have done differently if I were Mikel Arteta. And obviously, I've got the benefit of saying that with hindsight. He doesn't. He's got to make those decisions in real time, and so it's very easy to sit sort of in your armchair and tell the manager what they should have done. But I think the balance of the team has been off at times this season, and I think because of the injuries, we've had to rely on certain players too much to the point where we've probably burnt them out a little bit. And I think the Saka and Havertz injuries, for example,
Hmm.
are really prime examples of where a couple of players in particularly have been really heavily relied upon, and then they've suffered injuries as a result of maybe just crossing that line in terms of what they should and shouldn't be doing. But the balance has been a little bit off at times. It's felt a little bit predictable. The build-up play's not been as quick, in my opinion. The tempo's just dropped a little bit, and I think that's partly because teams have sussed us out. Teams have figured out what stops Arsenal. There's very specific areas that if you manage them really well, and Marco Silva's more than good enough to know this, and he's been successful against Arsenal quite recently. So I think he'll be very, very good at doing this. But just those low blocks in general have been a real problem for Arsenal. It's been our kryptonite. And with a lack of tempo, with a lack of creativity outside of Martin Odegaard, in the absence of some of those key players, I think it's really kind of shone a light on the fact that come the summer, we need more creativity, and we probably need
Hmm.
that centre forward that people have been talking about for a while.
Yeah, it feels like every transfer window, at least the last couple, the big story has been whether Arsenal are going to get the centre forward. But I've seen you've been linked with Gyökeres,
Yeah.
which I think would be a great move for you guys. There was some talk when he was a bit more junior in his career about him coming to Fulham, and that was quite heavily linked. And obviously, it never came off. And I feel a lot of regret about that, if I'm honest. Uh, I'd love to chat about the ex-Arsenal players in Fulham squad as well, because I think you guys can provide a real sort of unique view on these players. Obviously, Emile Smith-Rowe is the headline one. He's our club record signing. But Alex Iwobi is also ex-Arsenal, as is Bernd Leno. And Reece Nelson, who has been sidelined by injury, is on loan from Arsenal at the moment. Emile Smith-Rowe, let's talk about him. How did you feel when he left Arsenal? Did you think it was the right move? Were you emotional, upset, but thought it was right to see him go? Did you wish he could have stayed? And what are you feeling about his performances of what you've caught this season?
Well, with Emile Smith-Rowe, it was a particularly hard one to take, I think, as Arsenal fans, because when our resurgence, if you like, began under Mikel Arteta, he was a massive part of that. Him and
Mhm.
Bukayo Saka as a kind of duo were really at the forefront of that. And at the time, Emile Smith-Rowe was playing off the left-hand side, and he was coming in field and he was creating goals, he was scoring goals, he scored some really important goals. And there was a time where a lot of Arsenal fans would have told you that he was the more talented out of him and Bukayo Saka. Unfortunately for Emile Smith-Rowe, I think his body's let him down.
Mm.
The injuries have been a massive problem, and they've, I think, cost him his Arsenal career. I don't think it's anything to do with his ability or talent. I think it's there. You guys will see it week in, week out. It's definitely there. But what seemed to happen was Emile Smith-Rowe picked up a series of injuries right at the time where Arsenal had made maybe the most progress that they'd made over the course of the few years prior. And he just got left behind. And it's happened with a few players at Arsenal. It's not a reflection of them. It's not an indication that they're not good enough. They absolutely are good enough footballers to have top level careers. It's just that Arsenal went down a different route. They went down, particularly with Emile Smith-Rowe, they went down the idea of having an inverted left back, a left back that would join into the midfield, which meant that whoever played left wing had to keep the width. And
Hmm.
Emile Smith-Rowe isn't that type of guy. He will always naturally drift in field. Martinelli was that type of guy. Plus, Martinelli was fit, and things just developed and changed. And Emile Smith-Rowe, unfortunately, was left behind a little bit. So there was a sadness when he went, but also when you think that he'd barely played for Arsenal over the course of the 2 seasons prior, actually to get what we got for him felt like good business for us, but it also felt like you guys were getting a bit of a bargain as well. So it seemed to work for everybody. I think Emile Smith-Rowe is well documented in kind of Arsenal circles, probably got a little bit frustrated with the lack of
Mm.
opportunities when he returned to fitness. And you can understand why he wanted the move. You can understand why Arsenal felt the need to cash in. And I think it works for everybody. But like Emile Smith-Rowe, it's the same with Iwobi. It's the same with Leno. It's the same with Nelson. You know, we don't begrudge any of them for leaving. Like, we're all really pleased for them that they're doing really well, that they've landed somewhere that they can thrive. I rate Marco Silva really, really highly. I think he's a fantastic manager. Obviously, the proximity between the two clubs as well helps, I think, because you don't have to uproot your life and move to the other side of the country to join Fulham. And I think all of those factors made Fulham a really great landing spot for them. And they can be competitive at Fulham as well because they're a very
Yeah.
good side.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And like the Bernd Leno business is always the one that stands out to me. I think we paid you guys 8 million all in for him, and he has made that spot his own and defined goalkeeping at Fulham, really. It's been such a trustworthy signing for us. I think with Emile Smith-Rowe, I definitely understand about the injuries thing, and I feel like he plays with quite a lot of caution, and quite a lot of Fulham fans are feeling quite frustrated with him at the moment. I certainly am, but it makes sense considering the history of injuries he's had. He isn't going into every tackle and things like that because he's obviously scared and trying to protect himself a little bit.
I think as well with Emile Smith Rowe, I feel like his position is not one that every manager wants to utilize anymore in terms of what his best position is. For me, he's a 10. But if you
Mm,
look at the kind of modern game, the tens are disappearing a little bit. And I think that's a big factor. And I think that's a big part of why he moved on from Arsenal. If you look at the way the Gunners set up, it is a 6 at the base of the midfield, normally Thomas Partey, and then it's 2 8s. And the difference between Smith Rowe and, let's say, Martin Odegaard is that Martin Odegaard has that physical edge and can press and can be really intense and works back. And I think Emile Smith Rowe probably, when I say that the team kind of moved on from him, when the shape started to form and it was the 6 and the 2 8s rather than the 6, 8, and a 10, that was kind of the writing on the wall for Emile Smith Rowe. He no longer had a place in the middle of the park, and he certainly doesn't have a place in the wide areas either. So I think that's kind of where the writing was on the wall. So if you've got a team that will use him in that way, I think you get the best out of him. If you try and shoehorn him into different positions and different roles, I think that's where you end up maybe just losing a little bit of what he brings.
yeah, and I think we have done that a little bit, especially over the past few months. Yeah. Tell me about where Arsenal are going to be able to hurt Fulham then tomorrow night. Where are your big threats? Where are you going to be able to exploit Fulham's weaknesses and create those opportunities?
I think for Arsenal, they've come up against low blocks a lot, and I expect them to come up against one tomorrow. That's no disrespect to Fulham. I don't expect Fulham to come there and go hell for leather at the Emirates Stadium. Nobody does. It's not a criticism of them. But I think what you're going to end up with is a situation where Arsenal need to be really, really patient. They need to move the ball quickly. Martin Odegaard has had a really good international break, which is what was needed in terms of building up his confidence again, because he's been a little bit off it. Martinelli's getting fitter and sharper. And I think for Arsenal, it's about squeezing Fulham in, squeeze them into their own half, and kind of be relentless in your attacking nature. Every time the ball gets cleared, you've got to recycle it really, really quickly. And you eventually wear people down. And sometimes it's not pretty. Sometimes there'll be a lot of sideways passing, a lot of crosses into the box that, mean you're going into the kind of realms of playing that percentage football. But I think that's it, just constant pressure. I think that's how Arsenal will look to do it. Obviously, Mikel Merino's been playing at centre forward and he's got quite the presence in the box, which is surprising
Mm.
given he's a midfielder. But whether Mikel continues with that or starts to move to something that incorporates Trossard as the centre forward again, I'm not sure, because I'd imagine that going into Real Madrid, Trossard will be the one that starts at centre forward. So is it a case of now getting him back into that position with the right people around him and sort of, breeding him into that position a little bit again? So it depends, right? If it's Trossard, then it's balls into feet and it's trying to play in tight spaces. If it's Merino, then you're whipping the ball in from wide and hoping that he can get on the end of it. I think Ben White being back is massive for Arsenal because
Mm.
he offers a lot of support down that right-hand side, and we were probably missing that in his absence. So, yeah, wide areas and whether Arsenal can pin Fulham back, I think is going to be key to them breaking them down.
Yeah, Ben White is a player that Ben White and Trossard are players that I'd love to watch. Less so Trossard this season, but in previous seasons, he's been one of my favourite players to watch. Obviously, non-Fulham players, so always a kind of scary prospect coming up against him, I think. Um, so the flip side of that, where can Fulham hurt Arsenal? Where have you been weak? Where can we exploit? Where can we maybe pick up a few good chances tomorrow night?
I think if Arsenal play it the way that I think they're going to play it, they're going to commit a lot of bodies forward. They're going to put their centre halves into your half. They're going to squeeze you as high as possible, and so the transitions is always, where you can get at Arsenal. Arsenal are certainly better equipped to deal with those situations than they were maybe a few years back, but it's still an area of vulnerability, particularly down Arsenal's left hand side, your right hand side. That's where you got to look, I think, to hurt Arsenal, because what Mikel Arteta likes and demands is that his left back in particular goes roaming. His left back will find himself in the midfield, sometimes overlapping the winger. And that space, if you can hit that space early, it means that big Gabriel at centre back has to leave his position at centre back and come across to deal with it. Now, in that short, to be fair, he's really good at it, but in that period of time where he's transitioning from centre back to essentially a fill-in left back, that's when you've got that bit of time and that bit of space. And if you can create an overload there with a couple of bodies, it's very rare that the fullback, if he's gone into midfield, is going to be able to get back on time. So Fulham's right-hand side, Arsenal's left, is definitely the area that you should be targeting. And if you can get bodies out there and overload early, then that could be a problem for Arsenal.
Yeah, we've got Willian on our right. So a player certainly returning to the Emirates with a bit of narrative under his belt, but I guess we will see. Thank you so much for joining me today, Harry. Before we go, it would be great to get a score prediction from you about how you think this one is going to shake out.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to go for the famous old 1-0 to the Arsenal. I think we'll just have enough to get over the line. I don't think it's going to be a thriller. Arsenal's Premier League games have gone a little bit flat at the minute because of the situation that they find themselves in. I don't expect the atmosphere to be amazing either. So I think it'll be a little bit flat, but I think Arsenal probably just have enough. 1-0 win.
Yeah, I think that's very fair enough. I think there are going to be a few more goals in it. And I'm going to Fulham are 3 unbeaten against Arsenal, and I'm going to say it's going to be 4. So I think it's going to be 2-2. But I'm very excited for it. I'm going to the Emirates, and this is a much lower pressure game than our game on Saturday in the FA Cup. So I'm just excited. I hope we let our hair down a little bit. Harry, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for watching the preview. Please leave your score predictions and your thoughts about the game in the comments, and I will see you soon. Come on, you Whites.